All right, welcome back. This is the Something Adventure podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Adrian Fenty. How are you doing?
Doing great. Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you doing this. Adrian is a venture capitalist, and you are now thinking, did Adrian go to Harvard or Stanford? And you're wondering whether he worked at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. That was not his path. Adrian was actually the mayor of Washington, D.C., before somehow, and we're going to figure out how this happened, somehow getting into venture capital. So this is not your normal path into venture capital. But how did you find your way? How does someone end up becoming a mayor? You went to school in the Midwest, right? You were at Oberlin, like a kind of
Yes.
a great. If you don't know what it is, it's a great liberal arts school, right?
It's a terrific liberal arts school. It's has a storied history of um, being very open-minded and inclusive to women, African American, and other people who weren't going to university in the numbers that they should have early in American history.
Yeah.
And it was Oberlin, Ohio, actually was one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. All of the, and I'm a city guy. I'm from Washington D.C., born and raised. So all of that was very interesting to me, and I thought I would learn a lot more than just the amazing things I learned in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so
It's
that's the beginning of my story.
Yeah, the Midwest is it's kind of surprising, I guess. My mother went to Grinnell, which is in Iowa, and you think Iowa, right in the Corn Belt, but I think it was one of the first kind of gay rights states. Oberlin is in Ohio. I think early on, when that was all the Northwest Territory, they were actually talking about how they were going to work with the Native Americans at the time. It's not, you think of the Midwest as this kind of totemic thing when I'm in San Francisco. It's not really. It's got a lot of things to it.
So amazing people. I mean, we were 30 miles from Cleveland. These are some of the hardest working, just decent, honest, people. It's a mixed political state now. When I was at Oberlin, I did an internship for Senator Howard Metzenbaum, and he was one of the lions of the liberal left, along with Senator Ted Kennedy at the time. It's probably gone a little bit more to the center since then, but still, Barack Obama, 2008 and 2012, won Ohio. So anyway, so it's a great place. I've always, really thought that it's a great state to kind of, brings out the best and hardworking people, and I enjoyed my time there.
And how did you animate yourself into politics? You started working for senators because that's what was available, and now you're hooked, or was it something you always knew was something you wanted to do, or?
So there's a few paths all converged to get me into politics. I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll start with my parents. My parents are tried and true hippies. They moved from Buffalo, New York, to Washington D.C. to march in the civil rights movement and the women's liberation movement and the poor people's movement, and were members of the Black Panther Party. And I grew up in a household where they weren't part of the government, but they believed that as taxpayers they had every right to cause holy hell until the government served the people it was supposed to. Then I'm just a political junkie. I mean, I enjoy like reading about the Kennedys, and the Clintons, and eventually that kind of made its way into local politics as well. And I'm one of those people who like enjoy working on campaigns and reading the Washington Post about not just local campaigns, but national campaigns. And so the turning point was my wife and I at the time bought a house, and because I was so interested in local politics, and because my parents had always they were always involved, so I thought I had to be involved. I started going to civic association meetings, and I was quite young. I was 26, 27 years old. And when you go to civic association meetings as someone in their late 20s, and everyone else is kind of a senior citizen, which is usually the case, they start piling responsibility on you.
Yeah.
Soon I became president of the Civic Association. Then I became, president of the Advisory Neighborhood Commission. Then I ran a ward for a guy who was running for mayor, who eventually got second place, and it just started to go on and on from there.
You didn't do what the rest of us do, is just complain about politics the whole time, but have a hot take on Twitter, but don't actually run for anything.
Well, I had the advantage of liking what I do, and liking politics and getting involved. But I will say that I do often get very frustrated when I read people tweeting and thinking that that's going to lead to change. The only way to really change your community is by getting involved, and it's not easy. The civic association meetings are after a long day's worth of work, and you have to go. And
Right.
otherwise, the police aren't going to be as responsive. The public works department's not going to be as responsive. The city council member's not going to be. You have to do that, and then that's just the base layer.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly if outrage Facebook posts were the answer, Donald Trump never would have been president, because all my friends would have taken care of it with their super clever Facebook posts, which somehow didn't seem to do the trick. Why did you set your sights to, of all the different levels of politics, and maybe you're not done yet, but the city level, one of the big urban centers in the United States?
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Washington D.C. I mean, I love Washington D.C. It is not just like my home, like where I grew up. It's the city that I think is the best city in the entire world, that I would do anything to make better. And if someone starts to talk bad about Washington D.C., I'm going to defend it,
Yep.
probably without even listening enough to what they're actually saying. So it was never. I got involved in politics because I wanted to change my community. In Washington D.C., when I was growing up, it was not the shining city that it could have been and should have been. Everything, and we were literally known as the murder capital of the world.
Yeah.
The city services were the butt of late night jokes, and let alone the state of our public education system. And this bothered me, not just because it was things weren't working the way they should, but we weren't maximizing our potential. I knew that Washington D.C. was a place where, like, the best and brightest, as Kennedy said so well in his presidency, the best and brightest always came to Washington D.C. like my parents did. And then there were people like me and my brothers who were born in Washington D.C. And this great mix of people from somewhere else and from DC, and then the diversity of different types of people, I thought it should be the best city in the world in every regard. And so that's kind of what burned the fire in me and wanting to run, was I wanted to maximize the potential of the city that I love.
Yeah. And there you are. So you win, and suddenly you have yourself a shiny new city. How did you approach it? Well, so many people kind of get to where you are and they're like, oh, I guess I can't change things the way I thought I could, or it was a lot easier doing the tweets than doing the hard work. How'd you sort of set about making this thing?
Well, there were a couple of steps in between. So I served 2 terms on the city council. So after I did the neighborhood stuff, then I was the city council representative for my ward, my district, for 2 terms. I was a young, energetic, brash city council member. Yeah. And I didn't take no for an answer. If the middle school, if McFarland Middle School, if the air conditioning and ceilings and everything else was broken and the school system wouldn't respond, I would call the media and have them come up there, and I would videotape it. Wow. And I was gonna get an answer done, because it was just ridiculous that we pay taxes, and that's kind of how I was as a city councilman, which was not popular with kind of the establishment, if you will. Right. And so older city council members, longer term city council bureaucrats did not like this. But but regular people, who wanted to see change did. And so by being brash and outspoken and a little bit controversial in an effort to change the city, I garnered a following, and I was very lucky also, I should say. So we had a mayor at the time. His name is Anthony Williams. Most people don't know him because he's very kind of behind the scenes. He's more of a technocrat. He was a terrific mayor, and he really got the trains running on time. He was almost kind of like a COO more than mayor, or a CFO. And he took a really broken bureaucracy and made almost all of it work well. So what we had the luxury when I got elected mayor after I ran, to really go on after the higher hanging fruit. So I attacked like juvenile justice and child welfare and mental health and homelessness. And I hired like really brilliant people who had this passion that the government should work for the poorest citizens the most. And then we had the same tenacity with policing and transportation and public works. And then our signature issue was education. And so by Williams being so kind of effective at the basics, we were able to really kind of do what I said was, you can only make a city amazing if it's amazing for the lowest income residents. You know what I mean? Otherwise, it's gonna have a cap on how amazing it could be, and that's what we really started to do. So that's kind of a little bit about the administration.
And how difficult is it when you come in? There's entrenched forces. They've been there longer than you. They know how to do things that you don't know. How hard was it to kind of bust, to keep that from going, yeah, I like it the way it is, and I'll just wait this guy out for 4 years, and too bad. How do you cut through that kind of thing, or is that a thing?
No, this is a great question. So first of all, it's very hard, but any job is very hard. Your job is hard. Any job, you have to prepare, you have to work hard, you have to put in the hours. The saving grace to doing good and doing well in any job is that you love it. So I literally loved every aspect of my job. So even though it was tremendous hard work, I had no problem being up earlier than everyone, being up later, and hiring the best people. So I did that. But there is an entrenched establishment that fights back, but I didn't mind that because I knew that was part of I relished that. I relished people pushing back and fighting back. I relished people fighting against me in the campaign. So here's where the crux of the matter is in politics. So I had a very successful campaign. I had the most successful campaign in Washington, D.C. yesterday. There's 142 precincts. I won all 142 precincts.
Wow.
In order to maintain that popularity, I probably would have had to have a strategy where I just shied away from the most controversial things. Right. But that's just not who I am, and it's not how I was raised. And so I didn't just push the envelope. I stuffed the envelope past any sense of reasonableness. And my thinking was, I don't really care if I do one term. I'm going to get more done in one term than someone could get done in 10 years, because this is all I've been promised, and I'm going to go for it. And that's exactly what we did. Everything from building a new juvenile justice facility towards housing chronically homeless. My administration was in office from 2007 to 2011. People in venture capital know those years very well. Those are the years when the economy hit hard. We did a lot of cuts, but the government actually grew bigger, better, stronger, because we showed a lot of tough love. But again, our signature issue was education, and changing education in a democracy is a really tough thing, because the left side of a democracy partners with the status quo. And the status quo is most known to be represented by the teachers union. And so, and so you literally are pitting whether you want to have better academic results for children or whether you want to not change the collective bargaining agreement, which governs how you can hire and fire teachers. And it's just, it's actually like the Twilight Zone. It's an amazing, extremely disappointing part of the American and democratic system, particularly the Democratic Party, wherein many people know how to change education, but no one wants to do it because it is extremely politically unpopular. And and year after year, decade after decade, very underprivileged, low income, usually minority children who need a system that's innovative, bold, and thinks outside the box has an education system where people are afraid to change the smallest thing because it would be bad for their political future.
Yeah. And how did you come close to resolving that while you were there? I mean, how did that go? And I'm in San Francisco. Can we send somebody with a yellow pad over there to write down what you did?
So we literally took the 5 to 10 most controversial things that everyone knows you have to do to fix the school system, and we decided to do all of them.
Wow.
And that was we closed 30 schools in the first 2 years. There's only 140, I think. So it's, I mean, you can do the math. It's like almost 20%. You know, we did things. We changed the collective bargaining agreement. We held teachers accountable for performance. We embraced all kinds of innovation, from charter schools to longer school hours, um, to you name it. And there's other things that I'm even forgetting because it's been so long.
Yeah.
But the main thing we show is that the management of our school system is going to be our highest priority. And and uh, and 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 while that was unpopular with the establishment and the bureaucracy and the professional politicians, it had its following, and we wouldn't change anything. But
So,
but I will say, because you mentioned San Francisco,
yeah.
I mean, it I mean, you could read 10,000 tweets about San Francisco,
Yeah.
and there are 10,000 of them. I read a lot of them.
Yeah.
No one ever mentions education. It's unbelievable. It's literally like I'm in the Twilight Zone. People who spend their entire, you know, their entire children's life focusing on education for their own children, they don't ever think, wow, we need to have better educational outcomes in our own city for all the kids. And I mean, there's absolutely nothing material, important, or innovative happening in the education of San Francisco's public school system, and that has so many deleterious effects, from crime, from jobs, housing, people leaving the city. And it's amazing that no one is accountable or even talks about it.
Well, yeah, we have a couple. I mean, as I understand it, I do not have kids and don't have kids in the system, but as I understand it, we have a couple. One of the big things was they kind of got rid of neighborhood schools here. Um, so if you live in a neighborhood, your kid's going to go to school somewhere, but not necessarily your neighborhood. And apparently that destroyed a lot of the parental support networks because people just either left town or put their kid in a private school. And then we have a school board, and putting aside their specific things, generally a lot of people go on that board as like a stepping stone to other things in politics. So it's not like they're there, and should things even be run by a board? I don't know. It's not how you would run a company. So it just seems like it, people, either you have a kid in a school and you opt out, or you don't have a kid in a school, so you don't really know what to do. It's kind of exasperating here year after year.
It's exasperating. It's hard. The bureaucracy is entrenched. But I mean, if you love your city and you want your city to be amazing, you got to do it. You
Right.
can't just walk around saying it's tough. You know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, and what baffles me about San Francisco is that is that in the private sector, people never ever let any part about established ways of doing things slow them down.
Right.
They let it happen in the government all the time. They're so easily fooled that the government can't be changed, or that they're not the person to change it. It's really, it's like I said, it's a twilight zone. I really don't understand why the same level of crisp, decisive management and interest that people show for the private sector in the San Francisco area doesn't manifest itself over to people running for office and in campaigns and going down to City Hall and demanding more and understanding the budget process better, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Are the right people? This is something I wonder about. Like, let's say somebody says it has kind of like a moderate view of how to run San Francisco. They want the toilets to flush, and they want the parks to be nice, and they want the schools to, basically teach kids. It seems like that person doesn't run for office because they just, it sounds like Washington, you and the previous mayor were like this. But if you're like, I just want a well-run city, it seems like you don't have the same energy as somebody who has some really radical idea that they're passionate about, but maybe it's something, we're not going to have grades, or we're not going to fund the police, or whatever thing it is. It seems like those folks have more energy than somebody who just says, well, I want the city to run. I don't want to go do it. I want the city just to be, well run.
Yeah, I'll just give you one. So cities don't turn themselves around overnight. So if you take New York, for example, the reason why New York was able to lift itself out from its problems, and this is also true about DC and Miami and LA and Denver, is that they had a series of strong mayors, a series of effective mayors. So New York, about Giuliani and Bloomberg, and obviously, people have some qualms about Giuliani in particular, but Giuliani he ran the city in a very hands-on, professional way, and he demanded the most out of the people who work for the city. And then Bloomberg came along for 3 terms and followed up on that. And so now De Blasio, and then the new mayor, they continue that. And Miami is the same way. Miami has had an effective government. They don't have a strong mayor, but they've had an effective government since I was in office. There's never been a time where there hasn't. LA had Villaraigosa, and then they had Eric Garcetti, and so if you have a series of good mayors, then that's over 20 years. That's when the city performs. Right. In San Francisco, I'm a big fan of Gavin Newsom, but nothing has happened since Gavin Newsom. That was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
I wasn't around before that. So if everything before Gavin, everything after him, if there's not really top flight leadership, then you can see why the city is in the state that it's in. Yeah. It should be a Singapore or Hong Kong. It should be literally the most innovative city in the entire world, given that it's the hub of Silicon Valley. And yet, there's nothing of high innovation I've ever seen in San Francisco, let alone a government that works for regular people, and certainly not for the lower income people. It's a travesty. Yeah. And people who are in the government in San Francisco should be completely embarrassed by how they are not treating lower income residents, particularly homeless residents who need top flight government.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly not the money. They got nothing but money.
Never the money.
It's a $13 billion.
It's not the money in the private sector, and it's not the money in the government. It's always management.
Yep. Yeah, I was in Chicago during the kind of the second daily, and he was kind of I don't know how he did it. It might have been who knows who was involved, but man, he made things work.
Well, I mean, again, since you met I knew Daley, and he brought the same standards to his city that I see in the private sector here in Silicon Valley. Like, he would only hire the best. He would only demand the most out of them, whether it was the parks, the police department, and Daley was the leader on education. Bloomberg was we were the third city to take over the school system. Bloomberg was second, and Giuliani, to his credit, tried to do it. But Daley was first. And without Daley, I'm not sure if Bloomberg would have been able to get it done, or if we would have been able to get it done in DC. So huge credit to Chicago and to Mayor Daley and their approach on just getting results.
That's great. Well, now how do you? So you've done this amazing job. Along the way, where does venture capital possibly come into this world? Somehow you end up at Andreessen Horowitz,
Yeah.
or not as an advisor there, I guess.
No. So yeah. So I left politics. I lost my reelection. It was close, but it was a 6-point loss. And so I was 39 years old when I lost, and 40 when I turned over the gavel. So I was young enough to start a second career, and the Washington Post asked me would I ever run again the morning I conceded, and I told them no, and I told them not no because I told them no because I wanted to do something else. There are other things to do, and that political retreads are not the way to keep the city going, and I would never want to do that myself. And I was excited to jump into the private sector. And it took, so that was January 2011. In the next year and a half, I met Mark Andreessen. I met a lot of people in Silicon Valley. Mark, honestly, was just kind enough, and it was good. It was good enough timing because his firm was small enough at that time that, and they needed someone who knew something about regulatory because they had just invested in Airbnb, and they had a couple other companies that were facing state and local regulation. We led the investment into Lyft, and so he hired me as an advisor. Larry Summers was an advisor. Larry Summers has had a storied career and lived in Washington, and probably didn't come into the office at all. I was 40 years old and needed a second career and was fascinated with Silicon Valley. And I came out to Silicon Valley as much as I could, and very often was in the office every day learning. And I did that for 4.5 years. And after 4.5 years of trying to learn and contribute in every way I can, I was excited enough to start my own fund. And so now I'm on year 6.
Wow.
Of running my own fund with some amazing partners.
And why not just work for Andreessen Horowitz? Why? What motivated you to do your own thing?
Several things. I mean, I was a venture capital novice, so I learned really big, important things at Andreessen Horowitz. I mean, Mark and Ben and Scott and Lars and Balaji, Chris, Dixon, and the whole team there were amazing. I learned so much. But oftentimes in life, and this is true about venture capital, you need to be on the front lines to really learn. Like me just watching them invest, I learned things to a certain degree. Me investing and taking the risk and actually be the one who's responsible, I'm learning at an even faster pace. Yeah. And so yeah, that's probably sums up the biggest reason. And hopefully we've done a couple deals with Andreessen Horowitz, as we have with other funds. Hopefully we'll continue to do more.
Yeah. And how has your fund unfolded? You started it straight line to where you are now, or kind of how's that journey been?
Yeah, it's been great. So for me, this is we're on the 4th fund that I'm a GP of. So we did 2 very small proof of concept funds because that's as much money as we could raise, like $10 million, $15 million. We would write small $250,000 checks. We would just try to get the best entrepreneurs, best companies, and then whatever kind of ownership percentage we could get, we would go with that. And we figured that if we could prove that we had access to a great entrepreneur network, and that we could get into deals and be helpful to the companies, that that would lead us to be able to take bigger equity stakes in companies down the line, and that LPs would write bigger checks down the line. And so we took our small proof of concept success. We merged with another fund the same size as ours, called Cross Culture Ventures, and ours was called M. We created a fund which was M and Cross Culture Ventures, and the acronym is obviously MAC, and we launched that in 2019, and we've done 2 funds, and in these funds we invest in similar seed stage companies, and a lot of our approach is what I learned at Andreessen. You wouldn't be surprised if you're working with the best that you learn from the best. Meaning we try to invest in really technical founders with mostly software focused companies that can scale very fast and are defensible because of that. But now we're leading the deals. So we're usually getting upwards of 10% of the deal. Following on, if they have a board, we'll take a board or board observer seat.
Yeah. And what within that, is there anything that you focus on? Software that scales makes a bunch of sense. Anything that you focus on in particular, like any healthcare, or given your background, the future of cities? I don't know.
Yeah. No. No. I mean, so the whole concept that Mark, coined was software eats the world, and what that means is that every industry is interesting if you want to disrupt and make it improve and do better. So for us, we're much more concerned about meeting amazing entrepreneurs who are super talented and have an earned secret that they've developed, and with that earned secret comes a passion for wanting to change their particular vertical or ecosystem. So just to fully answer your question, we have a good collection of health tech investments. We have a good collection of fintech investments. We have a good collection of Web3 investments, which are mainly software and enterprise focused, and then other things as well. Most of our deals skew enterprise, but we do have some standout software consumer companies, and most are software. We have some amazing hardware companies, and those are more the exception to the rule.
What do you make of what it seems like Andreessen Horowitz has moved to almost a different level? Of course they are. I mean, Mark Andreessen is just such an amazing guy. But just today, they put like $350 million into a new Adam Newman, like WeWork type thing to change the future of cities. Are they doing venture capital? Or are they like just on some? I mean, of course they are, but that just seems like a level that's quite a bet to make, I guess is what I'm saying.
And obviously, I can't speak to that investment or anything that's happened since I left. But here's what I like, not just about Andreessen Horowitz, but about Silicon Valley in general. What attracted this former politician, East Coast guy, Washington D.C. Native. What I like about Silicon Valley is that people want to take bold steps. That they don't want to just change the world incrementally. They want to change it materially, and they're not afraid to take risks. And that's we had this discussion about how I kind of viewed politics. That's exactly how I viewed politics. I thought that governments should totally take risks and have huge ideas and be innovative and not be careful and politically expedient. And so it's no secret that no secret to why I've kind of love this place like a second home, is because people are very excited to take chances. And the more, what I've found, particularly people who've been in Silicon Valley, the more the bigger the idea, be it Elon Musk in space and self-driving cars, or like you just talked about, Mark, with affordable housing, education, banking, you name it. The longer you're here, the more disruptive you want to be, which I find fascinating and thrilling, because in politics, the longer you're there, the more careful you get. So it's almost the exact opposite. So we've made some big bets. We've got a great launch company. It's a rocket company called Stoke out of Seattle that literally is along the lines of SpaceX, where it's reusability of both stages of the rockets, so that the rocket can go up more often, take satellites into space more often, and do it less expensive.
Yeah.
Those are the type of things that we like to bet. And then we have healthcare initiatives. For example, we have one great healthcare company called Provida, which is addressing software for oncology doctors,
Yeah.
which it's a huge financial opportunity, but it can really be a great change agent in healthcare if doctors have more information that can allow them to provide better care for people who have cancer. So,
Yeah.
we also want to take big swings at big ideas.
It's a funny culture, isn't it? Like you just mentioned to me that you're investing in a rocket company that does whatever. I didn't bat an eye. It's like, yeah, it makes sense. Sure, you're investing in a rocket company. If you think about like maybe when you're in college, if someone said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to eventually invest in a rocket company," it would sound crazy. In Silicon Valley, that's what you overhear at the coffee shop every day.
So here's where like my past career and my current career like are merged at the hip. So I've always believed that you bet on people. So I told you that I had a good relationship with Bloomberg, and when I got elected, I went to New York. I'd already known him; he'd already been helping, but I was sitting down with him, and there was just so much advice coming into me. And I said, Mayor, listen, I want you to just very simply tell me if I want to make Washington, D.C. the most amazing city I can, what is the most simple advice you can give me? And I remember he paused for like half a second, and then he said, hire great people. And
Mm.
for the entire time I was mayor of Washington, D.C., that was my mantra. Like if someone came up to me and said, you can't hire somebody because they're not tall enough or they're not, you know what I mean, something enough. I literally didn't listen to you. All I wanted to know was this the best person humanly available to do the job? And if they were, then that is a person I have. Because what Bloomberg was saying, there's no margin of error for hiring someone who's not amazing. So my first week, first in working in Silicon Valley at Andreessen Horowitz, I remember there's this debate happening about, should we invest in a company? Should we not invest in a company? And Mark said, listen, this is an amazing team. We invest in people. And when he said that, I was like, oh, that's exactly, how Bloomberg was obviously a great private sector manager as well. It's exactly the advice he gave me. And since then, not only have I that I take it out what Mark said, I've heard 100 other great venture capitalists say the same thing. You know what I mean? There can be great ideas, there can be great execution, but ultimately, an amazing founder, is going to find a way. And I've seen that play out so many times over the 6 years we've been running our own firm.
Yeah. Well, I'll finish up here as you kind of look ahead. What are you optimistic about? Would you someday go back to run for something, run for president, or do you think changing the world from your seat as a venture capitalist is exciting? What excites you about the future and what you're up to?
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel the exact same way 11 and a half years later that I did, when I was giving my concession speech. I will never run for office again. I do
Mhm.
not believe in career politicians. Bobby Kennedy said, politics is for the young. It is. It is for, and it's not, and he didn't mean just age. He meant new, young, fresh approach. Bloomberg was quite old when he got elected, but he had a fresh approach because he hadn't been in politics his whole life.
Right.
And that's what's sorely missing. It's missing in the Democratic Party badly
Yeah.
right now. If the Democratic Party had a commitment to new politicians, we probably would be way ahead. And we don't. And we keep recycling the same politicians. Anyway, so I would never run again.
Yep.
But I am optimistic about politics because I see new people coming. We've got a great mayor in Washington, D.C., and I hope she gets reelected in November. There's some other great mayors around the country. And I hope that this upcoming election in presidential politics sees lots of new energetic people from both sides of the aisle get involved. But in the private sector, I'm extremely optimistic. I do believe that in the way to make huge macro change is through the government. The government just has all of our taxpayer dollars.
Right.
I mean, you know how much we pay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's half of our money. So we should hold the government accountable for results. It's silly to think that the private sector, can ever have the opportunity to change things as much as the government, but the private sector can do a lot. It can show the government ways to do things, whether that's through a great company that changes the environment for the better, or through a great company that sends rockets into space, as we were just saying, or healthcare. What I want to see, so I'm very confident about the private sector and optimistic, and that it will continue to improve. I do want Washington to support the innovative ecosystem of this country better. It drives me crazy when Congress takes cheap shots at Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're just doing it for political points. And we've created something in this country that is the envy of the entire world. And why? Sure, nothing's perfect, but find a way to be a part of it. Find a way to contribute. Don't just sit there and criticize when you haven't done anything. It drives me crazy. So anyway, so I think what I want to see Washington do is emulate some of the great management and innovative and technological things that they see in the private sector. That would be, and I know it's sorely needed, and that would be fantastic.
So great to wrap up on a optimistic note. What how do people, if they want to kind of track what you're thinking and doing, how should they find you? Twitter, or what do you?
Yeah, Twitter is great. It's literally just at Adrian Fenty, and our fund, Mac Venture Capital. We've got our website there, and so I try to be very active. LinkedIn, all the usual ways.
Great. Well, thanks so much for doing this.
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was great. Adrian Fenty has been my guest. Something Measured podcast. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.